Hi guys, welcome back to Aimee's Cooking. It has been a long while since I've made a video. Life has really caught up with me and it's just been one thing after another, so I do apologize. But here today, we're going to make some fantastic breadsticks. You're going to love this recipe. The bread is so soft, light, and fluffy. I'm not a fan of dense, doughy bread, and this is anything but that. You can see here how beautiful the color came out. It has a nice crispy top and golden on the bottom with like a sponge inner crumb. It's definitely not like your typical breadsticks. And with just a few key tips, you can make this at home to go along with pizza, spaghetti, or even on its own. It still tastes amazing. So follow along with me through this video and I'll show you what those things are, and let's make some amazing breadsticks. But before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I would love for you to join me, not just for this video, but many more to come. Okay, so let's talk about ingredients. You can find a list of all of the ingredients in the description box below. For the flour though, it's important to find one with a high protein content. I'm using King Arthur bread flour, which has about 12.7% protein. Higher protein means better gluten development, which means a better structured dough. The rest is basically just some salt, sugar, milk, egg, oil, and yeast. I'm using rapid acting instant yeast today, which means I can add it directly to the flour without having to activate it. If you're using the regular one, please activate it in the milk before you use it. And the milk can be warmed up in the microwave for about 30 to 40 seconds to help speed up that process. Once all the ingredients have been added, combine it and knead it on speed number 2 if you're using a KitchenAid mixer. If you're kneading it by hand, reduce the amount of milk by 15 ml and use a wooden spoon to mix it until the dough is not so wet and sticky, and then go in with your hands. Now after about 5 minutes of kneading, you can see the dough is still very sticky. It tears apart easily. This means we're not quite there yet. And you're probably thinking, why is the dough so wet? Trust me, this is one of the reasons why the bread can stay so moist after baked. Here we're at the 10-minute mark. The dough has more structure, but it still tears easily when pulled apart. It still looks very wet and sticky, and the surface of the dough also looks rough. It usually takes me about 15 minutes to achieve the texture I want. How long it takes you might vary depending on if you're kneading it by hand or if you're using a machine to knead it. And then also depends on what type of machine you're using. Now, regardless of the method though, that's not important. What's important is knowing what a good dough texture should look like. So pay close attention to those key things that I show you in the video. As long as you can achieve the same texture, the bread will come out just as great. This is what the dough should look like at 15 minutes. Now remember at the beginning how wet and sticky it was when I first started kneading it. If it wasn't for that though, it would be very hard to work with because the dough would be so tough. We wouldn't have been able to knead it this long for sure. Now, why do we even need to knead it this long? Well, it's because we're actually manually helping with gluten development. Most recipes will leave the dough sitting for hours so that the gluten can develop. Here, we sort of bypass all that by doing this. And also notice how most of the dough are no longer sticking to the side. There is some left, so just scrape it down and then continue to knead for another minute or two until everything is fully combined. I've greased my hand with some oil just to work with the dough easier. Look how tough this dough is. It's got lots of gluten for sure. Normally it would take hours of resting just to get this much formation. Now when I first started working with dough, I've always been told not to knead it too much or else it would get tough. That is true, but your dough is slightly on the wet side, so you won't have any trouble with that. So let's have one final look at this dough. You will notice how soft it is. Take a close look. The surface of the dough is very shiny. There are small pockets of air right underneath the surface. These are the things you want to look for. Underneath dough will just tear when you pull them apart. They don't have enough gluten to form this glossy elastic layer. And one last thing you want to do before moving on to the next step is to see how stretchy it is. Take a piece of dough and stretch it between your two hands. They should pull apart without tearing and create a thin, almost see-through sheet like this. The dough isn't ready if you can't do that. Now, can it be used? Of course. Will it give you that soft, fluffy bread? Probably not. Here's why. We add yeast to the dough to help soften the bread, and it does so by feeding all the starches and sugar in the flour. Meanwhile, though, it produces carbon dioxide gas, and this gas is what fills up between the dough and causes it to rise. But the air will escape and the dough will deflate if you don't have enough gluten structure in your dough. So the more gluten, the more air it can trap, the bigger the rise, the softer the bread. Basically, this whole process is key. Once determined that the dough is ready, shape it into a ball and then grease a baking tray with some oil and place the dough right in the middle. Cover it with plastic wraps. It needs to rest some so the gluten can relax. So when you go and shape it into its final form, it will be much easier to work with. Now this won't take very long at all, maybe 20 minutes or so. But if you skip this step, you will find that when you go to shape it, it's going to be very difficult. It just won't hold the shape and it may recoil onto itself. So just go ahead and wait for a little bit. Now you can test to see if it's ready by pressing your finger into the dough, and it should make an indentation, but then it will bounce right back at you. That's when you know it's ready. Now while you're shaping it, if you find that it's still giving you trouble and it's still very elastic, then just let it rest a little bit more and then continue working with it. Okay, let's go ahead and prepare the topping. Here I'm adding some Parmesan cheese, sugar, a little bit of salt, some oregano. We've got dry basil and a couple of tablespoons of olive oil. This is what I'm using for my topping. You can deviate from this and use what you want, whatever works for you. I didn't add too much salt because the Parmesan provides just the right amount of saltiness already for me. So I use very little, but of course you can add more if you want more. You just want to combine everything well and then cover the entire surface of the dough with this topping. Make sure you also get the sides as well. You can add a generous amount if you wish or as little as you want. The pan that I'm using here I think is a 9 by 13. If you don't like thicker breadsticks, then only use half of the dough, but here I'm using the entire amount, so my breadsticks did come out much thicker. Once you've added all the topping, cover it and let it rest for another 20 to 30 minutes or so the dough can rise some before baking. Oh my gosh, look at this. It looks so incredible. So what I did here was I baked it at 450 degrees for 15 minutes on the middle rack, but you do have to check it periodically because every oven does work a little different. So until it's golden brown, then you can remove it, okay? And that's it. Piece of cake. You will not regret this recipe. Hope you guys enjoy it. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any comment, please place it down below.